you. All right, so what is the ripple effect of having a female voice in the room? That's the question of the day. And for me, it started when I was in 2nd grade, and I was asked to play Abigail Adams in the school Founding Fathers Parade. And the only thing the teacher could tell me at that age about Abigail Adams was that she was the woman who told her husband, John Adams, to remember the ladies when they were putting together the Constitution. And I found that really interesting. I didn't really know what it meant when I was in 2nd grade, but it was interesting. Then I moved on, of course, through school, and I became a high school American lit teacher. And I first worked at a place called St. Joseph's Academy, an academy for girls in Cleveland, Ohio, which is where I'm from. Here, I was excited about being able to entertain my students with the kind of literature that I had read as a child, all these books about girls' lives and what they were like. So I went into the cupboard to see what were the books that I was going to be allowed to teach my class right now. And if you look at this list of books, you'll notice that they are all books by boys about boys. Except for the one at the top, To Kill a Mockingbird, which is by a girl, about a girl, and her brother, and her father. There was none of the books that I had read as a child, and I was very confused about that. I went to my department chair and I said, how am I supposed to teach girls all these books about boys coming of age? Why are there no books about girls coming of age? And the department chair said, well, we understand through studies that little girls will read books about boys because they want boys to marry them someday. But little boys will not read books about girls. And this was in an all-girls school. So I was a little confused. I said, no, when I was a child, I read all these books and many more that were focused on girls' lives. And these are the books I wanted to share with people. Going on 16, which taught me about being myself in a group. And The Witch of Blackbird Pond, which taught me about tolerance. Maya Angelou, who also teaches us about discrimination and tolerance. And A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which is one of my favorite books about a little girl growing up in New York in the ghetto in the 1900s. And it's all about assimilating into a new culture. So I'm not going to teach these books. Does it matter? Why is Ray in my picture? Because it matters, because we still have the idea that boys will not pay attention to important girls. And right now we've had that through Star Wars: The Force Awakens, because the toy companies thought that little boys would not play with toys of little girl action figures. So they gave us no toys of Ray, right? She's the star of the movie, in case you haven't seen it, catch up, right? So this is a problem that we have not solved. As I moved through my teaching career, I ended up moving to LA, and I became an assistant in a television production company called Stephen Cannell Productions. And here, I was only an assistant, but I learned how important it was to tell people what I was thinking, because I often got involved in scripts. There were all these action shows, some of which you may have heard of, the A-Team, 21 Jump Street, the TV show. Not the movie. All of this very boy-oriented and very fun, good programming. The problem is you worked for a writer-producer who was copying the things he'd seen all his career. What did I read a lot of? The blind date enters at 26. She still had her looks. At 26. I was 24 when I read that. So I walked into the boss's office and I very politely said, "How old is your wife?" Well, she was 32. So I said, "I'm so sorry, she's such an ugly old hag." And he was shocked about what I was saying until I pointed this out to him. He went, "Oh, goodness gracious, yeah, I'll change that." And he did. So the female voice, even though it wasn't in the writing room yet, was important in making a change. My favorite awful phrase was this one. The new captain enters. "She looks like she could grind your pelvis into dust." What does that mean? I walked in the room and I asked. It's either something vaguely, oddly sexual, which is weird, or it's supposed to mean she's tough. But you would never write a male in this fashion, right? And they changed it because I notified them of how I didn't like it. Now you think, hey, this is 20-some years ago. It doesn't happen anymore. We're a grown-up world. This was just in a script the other day. There's something unnerving about her. Maybe she just read too many books. Really now, really, okay? So this was something I thought I wanted to work on. Now, why is there a picture of poinsettias? This is my favorite story from when I worked at this company. Because of my voice, I saved a young gentleman in the mailroom from getting fired. That's because one day he was delivering all the presents to all the producers and the assistants at this company. He was going around delivering a poinsettia to every girl's desk and a gold-plated money clip to every male desk. Came by me, he gave me the poinsettia, gave my boss the gold-plated money clip. Then, oddly enough, in this 6th-floor company with 10 TV shows on the air, there was one female writer. And she, because she thought it would be funny, had one male secretary. And the poor kid from the mailroom walked by, put a poinsettia on the woman writer's desk, and put a gold money clip on her secretary's desk. Luckily, they were all at a meeting. So I stopped and I said, Michael, you might want to rethink that gift thing there. He said, well, my memo says all the girls get flowers, all the boys get money clips. I said, but do you think she's going to want to get a gift that's less than her assistant? And he went, oh my gosh, you're right. And he switched the gifts out. All right. Okay, so we have to rethink opening our mouths and making sure people see what's going on in the world. Now, eventually, I moved out of the job of being an assistant. I became a writer on these shows, 90210, Touched by an Angel. Did some work for ABC News. I had a pretty good time. I realized the power of now being the female voice in the room, because I could write something like this. When I say the doctor walks in, think about who you're thinking about. For me, it was George Clooney for a long time. How many of you thought of a male doctor? But all I have to do is write, she says, and they have to hire a female. That's how powerful it is to have a female voice in a room. Now, of course, I didn't invent this doctor. This is thanks to Shonda Rhimes, who, again, is a female voice in her room, and think about how powerful the women in her programs are. So that's important to me. Eventually, I had a child. He's in West Side Story in high school, because that's my favorite picture of him. And I was like, oh, now he's going to school. He'll get to read all the cool books I couldn't teach my children. Went to high school at Providence, which is over in Burbank. This is actually his stack of books. That's where I got the picture from. All books by boys about boys. 25 years after I faced that problem, schools were still only providing books about boys. This really bothers me. I got lucky because in working in television, I saw the power of the media and what you could do. In one particular episode of Touched, I had this actor, Renly Santiago, who's a movie actor. And he was doing a piece about a gang kid. And in one scene, the actor chose to cry. Just one little perfect tear came down his face. It was gorgeous, right? But the director literally said on the set, oh, no, could you do that again without the tear? Because boys don't cry. Are they not human? Do they not have full emotions? So, okay, this is how beautiful TV is. Writer-producers are in charge of TV, not the directors. So I let him film the scene the way he wanted, because that was his job. And the week later, when he handed in his print, he had chosen to add in the scene without the tear. But I was in charge, so I swapped it out with the scene with the tear. Because in my world, boys cry. Why wouldn't you want boys who cried, for heaven's sakes? So power is very important. Now, I got a PhD, as you all know, and that was exciting. And I started to read about other women who had been in other media rooms across the years. If you've ever watched a rerun of I Love Lucy, that's Madeline Pugh. Anita Luce wrote Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Treva Silverman got Emmys for writing on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Ruth Gordon, Joan Didion, Dorothy Parker, and this is Frances and Albert Hackett. You have probably never heard of Frances and Albert Hackett, except you've seen their stuff. They wrote It's a Wonderful Life, which repeats constantly at Christmas time. The Thin Man they adapted for films, and they wrote the Broadway play adaptation and the film version of The Diary of Anne Frank, which you have probably seen in your life. So this is a pretty powerful woman. And what I learned from studying her was that she once was quoted as saying, I'm always the only woman in the room, and I hold the fate of the women characters in my hand. I argue for what the gal will or will not do, and I can be completely unfeminine about it. And that's a challenge to a lot of girls, because we're taught to be very feminine. But we don't need to be, we need to get the job done. And Frances was very good about teaching me that. Now, along the way of getting this PhD and studying the things I've been able to teach, I've also seen women's voices in lots of other parts of the world, starting with the idea of quilting. Women used to send messages with their quilts. In this case, this is a Sunbonnet Sue quilt, which I thought was just adorable. They would make these quilts for girls before they were getting married, and each block would have a little special thing seeing what Sue would do later in her life, baking, taking care of children, all that. But they would always put in one naughty block to let girls know that they were allowed to be bad sometimes. Of course, back in the 1800s, they didn't have prostitute blocks, but I just thought this one was too adorable. So there you go, Sunbonnet Sue and a naughty block. Right? I never heard of that before. Likewise, of course, I learned a lot about Underground Railroad quilts, which we'll talk about in our second year in this school. And I was very impressed with how female abolitionists who didn't have a say, they didn't have the vote yet, but they wanted to be anti-slavery. So they would create quilts that had pictures on them that showed as symbolic, my home is safe to you. North Stars, right? Or a boat, which means travelers are welcome here. And they would hang them outside of their homes so runaway slaves would know this is a safe place for me to come tonight. So women have always been injecting their voices, and we need to listen to them a little more powerfully. Just recently, I watched War and Peace on television. And I was very upset because there aren't many women film or television critics. And without them, these kinds of programs get dissed by the people who do review them. In this case, they called this kind of a clunky soap opera. So I actually went and finally read War and Peace, which isn't something you read overnight, right? And I found out it really is a soap opera. A man, Leo Tolstoy, wrote a soap opera. When he writes it, it's considered classic. When we film it, a male reviewer looks at a lot of women worrying about their men going to war and says, that's kind of a soap opera. And it demeans the whole piece. And I really, really am sick of that. I also just finished reading the Neapolitan novels, which are out of Italy, translated in American, by Elena Ferrante. They're the story of two women in Italy after World War II, and it's their friendship across the next 50 years. Pretty good stuff. Elena Ferrante is a fake name, because whoever's writing these novels doesn't want to be associated with chick lit, because that is less important than legitimate literature. So we're stifling women's voices, and I don't understand why, because that hampers our boys, because we don't think they can believe in girls. And that's not true, and they've already proved it to us, because they watched Kim Possible. They watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They've watched the Powerpuff Girls, have they not? They've accepted women as superheroes in their lives. In fact, my favorite Powerpuff story is when my kid was in kindergarten, first grade, and he was on the playground one time, and another boy ran up and said, "Let's play Powerpuff Girls." And the first kid said, "Okay, I'll be Blossom." And the other kid said, "I'll be Buttercup." And they didn't think there was anything wrong with those names. Those were the names of female superheroes they were willing to portray. So the little boys are ahead of the big boys who are making these decisions for us. That's why we have to catch up. That really makes me crazy. I love the Powerpuff Girls. Of course, you noticed in your own childhoods then, The Hunger Games is all about a female protagonist, and boys read the book and saw the movie just as much. So we've proven that this generation of men are ready for this. We have to start treating them that way. The ultimate is the fact that my kid's a brony, which are boys who like My Little Pony. Friendship is magic. Seriously, they truly exist. It's because it's been taken over and it's become sort of a South Parkian kind of funny thing. But still, they make music about ponies and what they stand for. And they don't mind admitting it because it's a pretty fun show. So to me, that means we can go back to our schools and start letting boys read books about girls by girls. And that's going to help all of us with our humanity. That's my opinion. Because when women talk about how it feels to be alive and tell their own stories, as these women all have done, it's going to revolutionize the world, as these women have all done. So as far as I'm concerned, we just have to keep remembering the ladies. It's good for all of us.